topic of today's discussion round is feminist energy policy. What does it entail and how can we achieve it? Of course, in recent years, as I'm sure you are aware, more and more states have adopted this idea of feminist foreign policy. The first country was Sweden in 2014, followed by Canada in 2017, and now also Germany in 2021. This definition of feminist foreign policy is broad and varied and can include different aspects. Structural changes, of course, need to be part of this conversation as much as creating equal opportunities for girls and women at different levels of the processes and sectors that we're looking at here. Same applies, of course, to feminist energy policy, a term used less frequently, but that is gaining traction, thankfully, in recent years. The feminist foreign policy concept pioneered by Sweden also places women at the core and focuses on the 4 R's: rights, representation, resources, and reality. Broader approaches, such as feminist energy policy approaches by Bell, apply feminist ideals to the political, economic, socio-economic, and technological dimensions that foster more collaborative, decentralized, participatory, and democratic solutions. So really far-reaching concepts that we're looking at here. Therefore, the session is going to try to address a couple of questions in these contexts. What is feminist energy policy? What does it really entail in policy and in practice? Are there approaches that could be applied globally? Or do we need to look at this through our respective lenses? What are the benefits of pursuing such policies and how can we contribute to making them reality? I have excellent speakers here to help me answer these questions, and I'd like to introduce them to you now. First of all, I'd like to give a very warm welcome to Elizabeth Cecelski. She is founding member of Energia, the International Network on Gender and Sustainable Energy. She has worked for more than 25 years in research and practice on challenges of energy access in developing countries, specializing in energy poverty and gender issues, specifically in household energy, electrification, and rural development. I'm so sorry, Elizabeth. I asked you before the session how to pronounce your last name, and I still managed to butcher it. It's Elizabeth Cecelski. I'm so sorry. I'm usually really good at this. Please forgive me. It's wonderful to have you here with us. The next speaker I'd like to give a warm welcome to is Dr. Eva Schmid. She's Director for Hydrogen and Synthetic Energy Carriers at the German Energy Agency, DENA, in the Department of Future and Energy Supply, and her team supports the development of value chains, markets, and the system integration of hydrogen and powerful tools in both the national and international context. Her capacity at DENA is also focusing on feminist energy policy, so exactly our topic of conversation today. And in her work, she's also been addressing the question how to put energy transformation into practice. So it's great to have you here, Eva. Now I'm going to look into the round to see if our third speaker is already here, because we are looking forward to also welcoming Ellen Zitzewitz, excuse me, Deputy Head of Division for North Africa and the Middle East at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. But she may be joining us a little bit later, as I don't see her video appearing just yet. But that's great because we have you here, Elizabeth and Eva. So let's start the discussion with the two of you. We want to structure this in 3 different rounds. First, discussing the state of the energy sector and gender equality. Then we want to examine core elements that are necessary attributes of feminist energy systems and have a look at the action that we need to take to put such a system into practice. So as I said, please feel free to use the chat throughout this event to ask questions and make comments, and later I'll be opening the floor for all of you as well. So I feel like I've spoken a lot. I'm very happy to pass the floor over to you in a moment, Elizabeth. You're one of the founders of Energia, International Network on Gender and Sustainable Energy. So you're doing tremendous work with this organization on the gender energy nexus. Can you describe your work in more detail, introduce it to our audience, and perhaps also outline the different dimensions that you feel we really need to keep in mind when looking at this gender energy nexus, please? please still unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Geraldine, and thanks to GIZ, and the Federal Ministry for the opportunity to engage today on feminist energy policy, which is so much aligned with Energy's mission. It is an honor to engage with this audience and tell you about our work in the Gender Energy Development Nexus. Energy's 2030 vision is that women have an equal opportunity to lead, participate in, and benefit from energy access and a just and inclusive energy transition as an essential right to development. Energia has been working in this space since 1996 in 22 countries in Africa and Asia. And during this time, we have seen recognition of the interlinkages between gender, energy, and development grow and deepen, from seeing women as victims of the rural energy crisis to engaging women as key agents in achieving sustainable energy access as entrepreneurs, professionals, and managers, to bringing women's voice and agency to the table in energy decision-making and asserting energy access as a human right. Today, the Gender Energy Development Nexus is being addressed not only by Energia, but by a wide variety of national and international entities in 4 critical areas. Energy poverty is the first one, access to electricity and clean cooking fuels and technology via time spent in domestic chores and unpaid care that limits women's access to education and employment. And women's exposure to health risk is also there. The second area is employment and leadership in the energy sector, including in the political arena. Thirdly is energy entrepreneurship and productive uses of energy. And fourth is the enabling environment. So women's participation in energy planning, policies, regulation, budgeting, markets. Now, in phase 7 of Energia, we are focusing on women driving the energy transition and climate justice, scaling up our impact in 7 countries, working with 24 local partner organizations in Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, Tanzania, and Nepal, with plans to expand to Bangladesh and Uganda, and working in 4 program areas. First, we have a large program in women's energy entrepreneurship, empowering women in renewable energy value chains and productive uses of energy in climate-sensitive sectors such as agriculture. Our work since 2014 has empowered 12,000 women entrepreneurs to own, lead, and grow resilient energy businesses and created employment opportunities for at least 10,000 individuals through women-led micro and small enterprises. These women entrepreneurs have provided energy access to more than 7 million consumers in last-mile communities. Energia's second focus is on the enabling policy and market environment. Internationally, our focus has been on influencing Sustainable Development Goal 7 on sustainable energy, where Energia co-chairs the Technical Advisory Group on SDG 7 together with Norway's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have collaborated with UNIDO and GWNet to create the Gender and Energy Compact that brings together 75 organizations, including academia, civil society, financial institutions, multilateral bodies, NGOs, and the private sector, as well as 10 member states that we actively engage as champion governments to incorporate gender and energy into the global political SDG 7 narrative. Germany is not a member of the Gender and Energy Compact, and maybe this is something to consider. In Europe, Swedish SIDA and Iceland are members. Energia provides technical support to Compact members to develop gender action plans that are submitted to the UN Energy Action Network. And we also create opportunities for women leaders and entrepreneurs from the countries we work in to be heard and represented in international policy forums as right holders. Our third focus is gender mainstreaming, working with utilities, renewable energy companies, regulatory bodies, and rural electrification agencies to help them develop gender action plans with a gender transformative agenda. Since 2005, Energia has trained over 2,000 energy practitioners in gender analysis and gender action planning, and we can point to over 60 gender and energy action plans developed and endorsed, including 11 government agencies. And finally, Energia strives to be at the forefront of knowledge and expertise on gender, clean energy, and climate action. Through research, publications, knowledge sharing, we aim to generate evidence-based insights and best practices that contribute to informed decision-making and thought leadership in the field of gender and energy. There's much more information about Energia's work and publications about the Gender Energy Development Nexus available on Energia's webpage at www.energia.org. Thank you.
Fantastic, Elizabeth, thank you. I just shared that link in the chat because there's already a lot of people saying hello and using that. And it's amazing to learn about the really important work that you're doing. I would love to get back to some of those points that you already made in the course of the conversation, those different critical areas that you just outlined and how we're going to be addressing them, or perhaps even directly supporting also the work that you're doing in these, and hoping that we can discuss later how to get Germany on board at the Energy Compact. So thanks very much for sharing those points as an opening intervention. Eva, I would like to pass the microphone to you next. Dana, you are implementing a lot of different bilateral energy programs on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. And I would love for you to tell me a little bit about those and the state of gender equality within those bilateral partnerships that you manage. What are the different ways that Dana is working on this, please?
Thank you very much. So first of all, I hope I can be understood. I switch off my camera every now and then because my internet is not that stable here in the rural area, unfortunately.
But it looks lovely, and we're glad you even have internet in a rural area in Germany. So let's just go with it. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, so at DENA, we're implementing 4 energy partnerships, the ones with Israel, Ukraine, Turkey, and Kazakhstan. So my role in this is focusing on hydrogen only. So I'm more of a topical, not that feminist energy policy person actually, but we have a colleague who's focusing more on the gender aspect, and Caroline Krolik, you probably know her in this network, and she has, for example, established a female energy network in Ukraine. So that was really successful and is really active at the moment. So that's something, I think that's a really positive track record at DENA. The partnership with Israel is really new at the moment, and to my knowledge, there's not an explicit gender aspect happening at the moment. But then with Israel, again, it's at least from the participatory aspect, it's quite gender balanced actually. It's a lot of women that are engaged in the partnership on the side of the ministries, for example. With Turkey, I would really love to establish more of a dedicated gender aspect. There's a huge renewable energy network, female energy network in Turkey that I think we should collaborate more with. So actually, there's a lot of potential to my understanding. And with Kazakhstan, it's an energy dialogue at the moment. It hasn't really been much of a focus. What I would like to see more there is we're looking currently into the water situation in Kazakhstan, because for generating hydrogen, you need water, and actually it's quite a dry country. And I think water is something that where I would love to see some more gender-specific analysis how it affects people in Kazakhstan, because traditionally I think the water availability is something that hits particularly families and so on for water availability. So I would really love to see more dedicated gender or feminist energy policy aspects in the partnerships and also across the different organizations, because I only spoke for DENA now, and there's 3 more organizations that implement the partnerships. And I think I personally think that it would be very helpful to have some agenda of a feminist energy policy within Germany, and then kind of live that in the partnerships, because at the moment we don't really have anything in Germany that we could then use as a blueprint for the partnerships, so to say. So that's why I really loved the title of this event today. I think it's the first time I see feminist energy policy as the title of an event and a conversation, and I think it's really overdue, and I think that's something we're going to speak about in the coming hour. I think we can borrow on feminist foreign policy, for example, and also on the gender mainstreaming aspects, but there's some specific aspects to energy that I think, Elizabeth, you outlined a lot of what I had in mind already. And I think it's worthwhile exploring that further, what the goals of energy policy are, but I'll save that for the next contribution.
Thank you very much, Eva, for those points that you made. And I would love to get back to the how you're having those conversations and trying to open those spaces to get more partners dedicated to these topics as well in the next round. But what I want to focus on now is your understanding of feminist energy policy. I agree, this is an incredibly important framing, and I would also like to thank JSNBEE for framing this session this way, because I feel it's a conversation we have to have. I'm guessing that here from a German perspective, we would like our foreign officer, foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, to sit together, perhaps with the Minister of Economics, Mr. Habeck, and come up with a definition from their side, what we mean by that. But let's discuss our definition, what you guys mean by feminist foreign policy and feminist energy policy, sorry. And I'd love to get back to you, Elizabeth, as you work with a lot of different communities and try to empower women at the grassroots level also, as you outlined in your first intervention. Perhaps you could share, how do you imagine a holistic feminist foreign policy approach? What do you think you think you should... Sorry, I got distracted because Ellen appeared. It's lovely to have you here, Ellen. I gave you a quick introduction. I'll give you another one in just a minute. But yes, Elizabeth, could you give me an understanding, what do you think a holistic feminist energy approach should entail?
Let's see, am I muted? I am muted.
No, you're not muted.
No, I'm not muted. Okay. So Energia has been working with feminist energy policy for many years, but we use the term gender responsive energy policy. And we talk about enabling a gender just energy transition. So from our experience, a gender responsive energy policy should include embedding a gender lens in the entire project cycle. And I think I don't have time to go into the details of that. But it's a gender analysis or audits to identify policy gaps, needs, priorities, existing strengths, with stakeholder participation. It's developing a national gender policy together with stakeholders in the energy sector, leveraging multilateral agreements, having a gender mechanism, a unit, staff, roles and responsibilities, and a budget, cultivating and supporting gender champions within the government, capacity building and technical support, sensitizing decision makers, and then translating all of that into practical guidelines. So Energia has been engaged in doing this for quite a while, and we fully embrace a feminist energy policy. For example, Energia has assisted the Kenyan Ministry of Energy in developing its gender policy that was adopted in 2019. In 2020, 2022, Energia assisted the NDEV partnership that's being implemented by GIZ and RVO to develop a gender strategy and guidelines and to engender its log frame, results framework. So we were asking ourselves going into this discussion today, what is the additionality of feminist energy policy? How can it push the boundaries further from this gender responsive that we're using? Is it different from a gender responsive approach, or is it just a new term to increase attention to gender equality issues in Germany's international engagement? The 3 R's or 4 R's, the equal rights for women and girls, equitable representation of women, equal access to resources, reality and accountability. It parallels closely what we call gender responsive energy policy. It also has gender mainstreaming, gender budgeting, internal diversity as the main areas of action. That's also similar. So in discussing this with our coordinator, Sheila Okorocha, we came up with 3 areas where we think that feminist energy policy can add value to what we call gender responsive energy policy. So first, gender responsive energy policy at a minimum seeks to address women's practical needs for energy services as a result of the gender roles assigned to them by society, for example, cooking energy needs. It aspires to, but does not always address women's strategic needs required to overcome the subordinate position of women to men in society that relates to empowerment. So I think a feminist energy policy should definitely include addressing women's strategic needs, for example, rights to land and credit, participation of women in decision-making, equal opportunities in employment in the energy sector. And a feminist energy policy should have a grounding in human rights and women as rights holders, which can also be part of the goal of providing equal energy services to women and men. Access to cooking energy, for example, should be a right, a basic human right. And this is linked to poverty alleviation. But a feminist energy policy should go further. It should address breaking down structural inequalities and the transformation of gender roles, as well as benefits for women and for energy projects. So we do not see these approaches in competition. Rather, they can be complementary and mutually reinforcing. A second way that feminist energy policy can add value is with mandatory targets. Gender responsive energy policies, such as the Kenyan one, for all the good things that it does, they don't usually have any quantitative accountability framework. They're voluntary, not mandatory. So we always argue for an accountability framework with results indicators, but this happens more often at project level than at policy level. So a feminist energy policy should have mandatory targets that are monitored, reported, and enforced. And in the German feminist energy policy, it is monitoring the share of women in senior positions, and hopefully it will monitor other key metrics, such as the share of projects that have gender action plans and their outcomes. Women must be able to hold governments accountable for rights failures, and seeking to achieve gender equality in quantifiable terms is an important step forward. Thirdly, gender responsive energy policy often includes gender budgeting, but this has not led to the scale of investments that we need. A feminist energy policy should include not only gender markers, but also the resources for gender actions in budgets. For example, releasing the next tranche of funding only when projects have met certain benchmarks, such as completing a gender action plan. So it's encouraging that the German feminist foreign policy not only has policy objectives, but also spells out funding targets for the Federal Foreign Office. So this is what I would like to learn from the discussion today, is what can be the additionality of feminist energy policy to our current practice in gender responsive energy policy.
Well, I'm certainly glad we're recording this session, Elizabeth, because if ever Frau Baerbock and Mr. Habeck do sit down together, we have a perfect input for them already as a starting point to write up this this policy paper. Thank you very much for sharing those points. I'd love to learn more about those policy dialogues and how you are shaping those in collaboration with your partners at Kenya, and also the topic of investments and scaling funding in this area. Perhaps in the later course of the discussion, although I'm already receiving questions from our attendees as well. So, Ellen, it's really great to have you here. I already shared your position with our audience earlier, but let me just recap that you are Deputy Head of Division for North Africa, Near and Middle East at the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and really importantly, also one of the initiators of Women Energize Women, this campaign and this network and initiative that we're part of with our event today, and that you've worked in different senior positions across government in Germany. So that's just a quick recap of your bio. It's lovely to have you here with us. We've just opened this round of discussing what our panelists feel this idea of a feminist energy policy should look like, and Elizabeth just shared all her fantastic talking points on that. So I would love to learn from you. Of course, there are different government bodies currently looking at what feminist policy means to them. The Ministry for Development Corporation is, for instance, drawing up their own policy on feminist development and what that can look like as a strategy. I would love to know what approaches within the Ministry for Economics and Climate Protection that you're part of is planning to advance feminist energy policy strategy, what this kind of feminist policy should look like in your opinion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Geraldine, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I'm sorry for the delay, but I listened in for the last 15 minutes, so I hope I kept everything. I see ourselves at the moment more as an enabler of the debate. I don't think we are as far ahead as the foreign policy or the development policy is, but I think this discussion, and I'm very thankful for the BE and GIZ colleagues who are enabling these debates today. And it's also great that you are there, Eva. You also pushed me quite in the thinking here. I think this debate today could be an initial point to really consider that. And I heard a lot on the different instruments on the implementation side, but I think maybe we could step back once before and set ourselves an overarching target. I mean, the feminist foreign policy looks very much in peace and stability. What could be the feminist energy policy? Isn't the feminist energy policy also an energy policy which aims at carbon neutrality or at decarbonization of the energy sector? So maybe this could be also like a baseline of debate where we're standing on, because women are affected by the destructive effects of too much fossil fuels in the world, more even than many men, because they are in more vulnerable positions here. So maybe this could be, I mean, I see ourselves here really like an initial discussion and starting point. And maybe we could use these moments today to reflect what could be cornerstones. We could write a short concept paper and then having the next debate based on that. And let's start maybe with the meta target. What could be our meta objective? And I think here alignment with the Paris Agreement, and I would really like to see a stepstone maybe in the at the COP28 as well for that, and then very defined target instruments where we can learn a lot on what you have done, Elizabeth, in Kenya and in other circumstances. But I think also we need to bring it more into the public attention. We need to bring it. We need to really bring it in the center of the debate. And that is sometimes why I think giving it also a name and aligning it with the foreign feminist foreign policy, aligning it with the feminist development policy could help actually to, even though I think we are based on the gender responsive policy, but we bring it up to another level and we align it also with these major cornerstones of our foreign policy here. So that's just some thoughts I have. And then I think we're too shy still, if I may say so. I think we need to really define clear targets. What are our clear targets? Is it 50% of women in relevant decision-making bodies in the energy sector, in the international energy organizations, in the national energy organizations? I mean, let's really try to define much more also quantitative targets. And from that targets, we then develop our instruments. We then look what is needed again on the financing side, on the action plans. I think an action plan, just for an action plan, maybe not really hitting the best targets. But I'm here really today as an enabler, as creating a platform. I want as much input as possible. I don't see ourselves giving this direction and then you're just filling it, but rather like that this is a joint approach of all of us, and bring the best heads here together to define maybe a short concept paper in the next weeks.
Thank you, Ellen. It's great to know that this discussion can serve as an input for that. So Eva, of course, I'd like to ask a similar question to you. I was very honored to host the DENA event on hydrogen and the different research projects happening across Germany to see how hydrogen could become an important game changer in the field of renewable energies recently. So I know that this is a topic that you are intensely working on at DENA. And I wanted to ask if there are any specific implications, regarding feminist foreign policy from a hydrogen perspective in the hydrogen sector, what your opinion or core elements would be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I think that there might be some, but I think the majority of implications are more generalizable, because in the end, hydrogen is simply a energy conversion step from electricity if it's green hydrogen, and then everything that's involved in generating renewable electricity in the first place is what really matters, right? The electrolyzer is just the additional step. That's why I would actually like to answer a little bit more generalized. And I appreciate very much what Alan just said, that this might serve here as a starting point for something that has a name and a concept, because then it's easier to speak about. And with respect to that, I'd like to contribute a little bit of a different angle, I would say, or a bit my view on this. I think I agree with everything that Elizabeth said, and I have actually never heard of a gender responsive. No, what did you say? The concept,
Gender
I wrote it.
Yeah,
no, gender responsive energy transition, exactly. I think the way I look at it is, if you have feminist energy policy, you have on the one hand energy policy, and that's where I professionally come from, and then you have some sort of feminist policy, which I have got to know as feminist foreign policy mainly. That's how I got interested in the topic. So if you start from energy policy, you have the classical targets of a secure, affordable, and ecologically sustainable energy system. That's the three goals that exist, or are enshrined at least in German law. I think they're also discussed a lot in literature. And then climate mitigation is basically something that you derive from this ecologically sustainable goal. And these goals are conflicting. So there's huge literature on that if you design an energy system that's really secure, it won't be affordable, or if it's sustainable, it's not affordable, or if it's affordable, it's not secure, and so on. Well, we're learning how to deal with those conflicting goals and reduce them, and find better ways of actually bringing those goals together. But there's a lot of literature on how they conflict, at least in the past. And to my understanding, I think there should be actually a fourth goal, which is then justice. And that's how, or it's an underlying thing. This can be debated. Some people think it should be a goal in itself. Some people don't think so. But I think that's where the feminist aspect would come into play. And I think the core aspect of feminist foreign policy is acknowledging power distributions. So that there are structural power distributions where people with female gender and other genders don't share the same rights, resources, and so on. So for ours. And I think if you put both together now, it's about who is deciding policy. So that's why we debate on who is sitting at the table, who's the entrepreneurs and so on. So about the group that is designing policy, because they bring different perspectives. And the other aspect, who is policy designed for and how is this being done? And if you take justice as a goal, you can take, well, the next question is, what kind of justice concept do you foresee or do you follow? And so, because there's a lot of different justice concepts if you have looked into this. And what I really find useful is to differentiate between procedural justice and distributive justice. So there's also other justice forms, but I find these two particularly relevant, because looking at procedural justice is this question, how policy is designed, that becomes really interesting, because then closed shop policy, where, I don't know, people with different people with particular vested interests make policy for those vested interests, is something that's not perceived as procedurally just. So it's something you shouldn't do, right? So a feminist policy would have different concepts of what's procedurally just, and then have different policy developments, basically. And the other aspect is the distributive aspect of power, of justice, and this is about power and wealth. So how is power and wealth and capital, for example, distributed? And that's greatly impacted by the energy policy, right? Because in the end, if we have mitigation policy, it's also about redistribution. Everybody who looks at this a bit more in detail in the literature, for example, comes to this conclusion at some point, that if you want to have a decarbonized energy system, it's going to have a different wealth and capital distribution than it has today, because the asset owners of oil, gas, and coal, that wealth will be shifted to renewables, for example, and so on. So it's actually structural breaks that you need to generate. And then the question, to my understanding, where we should speak actually about feminist energy policy, is that there is a clear nexus with all the struggles that the feminist history, or that feminists had in history, right? And this is about care. So who's doing care work? How is care work being pursued? Is there any capacity for actually working on energy policy? That whole discussion of state and human security, I think, really matters. When Annalena Baerbock had her speech at the BETD, she spoke about how the heating systems and houses are actually, for her, part of human security, because you need to be warm in winter in Germany, and then energy policy is part of that human security definition. And I think there's a lot to gain from thinking about human security, and so on and so forth. So at the moment, I find I think about feminist energy policy for a while now, and when I speak about it every now and then, I get more of a, well, do we really need this, or is this a cute little thing? I don't know. Like a lot of men that haven't reflected all these issues react like that. Also women, but mostly men, actually, because there's mostly men. So I've been counting men and women in events that I attend since 10 years, I think, and I'm usually 1/5 women and 4/5 men in the conversations that I'm in. So I would really love to gain more traction on this, and I think we should start with the goals of energy policy and figure out whether a justice or this, yes, what kind of goal is it actually that should be added to that dimension.
Thank you so much, Eva. I feel like after all your last interventions, Elizabeth and Eva, there should have been what we call in Germany Szenenapplaus. So I'm sure that some people, as I was silently, were applauding along with your statements made. I want to open it up a little bit to the audience in a minute as well, but also to the panel now, addressing you with a good question to see who wants to pick it up first. Allow me to ask a little bit of a critical question here, because I'm a little bit inspired by the book I finished reading over the long weekend, and because I'm a little bit uninspired by what I'm seeing currently coming from other government institutions in Germany. I just want to be really quite frank here, because I come from a development cooperation background, and I feel what we're seeing very little of at the moment is really addressing structural issues. Well, I'm seeing a lot of this, for instance, coding classes for girls. So breaking this down to the project level, and of course the operational project level, which on the one hand is needed, and I know that's one of the layers that you also talked about earlier, Elizabeth, but this more structural layer that you also addressed is, of course, of at least equal importance. And here's where I'm seeing quite a little. So one question is, how do we make sure that when we're talking about feminist policies, in the field of foreign policy, in the field of energy, that they are as holistic as we need them to be. And here's one more critical question. The book I finished reading is called Survival of the Richest by Douglas Rushkoff. Highly recommend it. And if I'm thinking of his words now, I would say that a feminist policy, feminist energy policy needs to go further. Needs to go further and perhaps address issues around degrowth, around regeneration, around collectivization, cooperatives. And would you agree with that? Do you feel we need a little bit of a more radical approach if we're thinking about this as a real structural game changer and a puzzle piece toward a more sustainable and hopefully more longevity of all of our lives on Earth? Throwing this open to whoever wants to pick it up first. But if not, I'll pick on someone.
Maybe
please, Ellen, you first.
If you're like Geraldine, I think we need to strike a balance here. If you want to make it a concept which flies as a ministerial concept for Germany, I think it needs to be as ambitious as possible without shying away, let's say, the top 20% of the peer group we are aiming here. So that would be a little bit the corridor I would like to see the formulation. So I think we need to review as all the radical ideas which are on the way, but we also need to see a little bit like what is also compatible and what's also fits well to the foreign feminist policy and the foreign development policies agenda as an additional cornerstone. I think what adds here, I think the foreign feminist policy looks very much at political processes. The development cooperation also looks a lot on the perspective of engaging with partners in developing countries. And I think on the foreign energy, on the feminist energy policy, we have we are targeting actually the mainstream energy sector. I mean, we're really hard. We're in the center debates here of the energy transformation. We're talking to large-scale industry CEOs. We're talking about financial flows in the 2-3 digit billions of dollars and even more, which have to be transformed in the energy transition at the moment. So I think it is really big what we are thinking here, and I think we should really address here also what is energy policy. And I think energy policy is something globally with many different aspects, as also said with the United Nations development targets. But I think here also we need to address the mainstream challenges we have at the moment as an additional segment. And I see here also the first questions in the chat, like how can we participate in developing such a concept node? I would like to go out of today's debate a little bit with a focal point, maybe with a core group or volunteers, anyone who has interest to contribute his ideas also in a written way. We should collect that and then really define also a little bit a mechanism and a time plan on what we want to, where we want to land. So yes, radical, yes, but not maybe within the system to transform the system would be a little bit the corridor I would like to define here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you. Any additions, Elizabeth or Eva? Elizabeth, please. You're still mute, please.
You need to unmute.
Yeah,
yes.
sorry.
Perfect. Lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to follow up on that because the yeah, we do have to ask if the goal is to broaden reform coalitions, does the feminist label enable new alliances and open up more transformative and creative ways of working, or does it potentially increase resistance against policy goals that would not necessarily be deemed controversial if they were framed differently? For example, you mentioned several times Sweden. Sweden had to abandon their feminist foreign policy in 2022, even though they still claim to uphold gender equality commitments, but their gender budget has actually been cut. So there was a backlash there. And in the countries in Africa and Asia that Energia works in, the term feminist energy policy is not familiar to energy policymakers and practitioners, and it may not resonate. So we would really have to be able to show that there is value added in addition to the gender responsive energy policy approach that would resonate with our target audience. And honestly, even though there is, of course, a lot of support for carbon neutral and moving to renewable energy in developing countries, but the idea of eliminating fossil fuels in most developing countries is not well received in countries where women lack access to basic energy services, lighting in their kitchens and clean cooking and labor-saving technologies and income opportunities. So I think there can be movement there, but you have to think about the different target audiences that we're dealing with.
Especially when marrying to such unpopular, sadly still unpopular concepts as feminism and degrowth. But yes, I think those are very well taken points of advice. Yes. Eva, is there anything that you want to add from your perspective on this question?
Yeah, very briefly, I think I agree with what has been said. I would like to add maybe that, well, on climate change action, basically, you can differentiate structurally in mitigation and adaptation. And I think with adaptation, even though, so speaking from Germany, at some point we also need to adapt, but I think adaptation is mostly something where German development policy is active at the moment, so or the vast part. But then mitigation is something that you need to do within the country. So, and I have a background in more energy policy, domestic mitigation action. And because you mentioned cooperatives, I had this, I remember that there is a great analysis of energy cooperatives in Germany and who is active in there and what their structure is. I forgot who has written it, but I can share later. And something I've learned is that energy cooperatives in Germany are hugely male dominated, right? So it's, I don't know, 80 or 90%, I don't recall the precise number, but something in that range, were men that were active. And I think here's that the care, distribution of care, and traditionally who is active in that kind of topic as an energy is really important. And I think a feminist energy policy will have to look at who is doing care work, for example, even though it's not core of energy policy, but I think that is so structural, how to get more women engaged in the solution finding acts, that even though it might be far from what the Ministry for Economics and Climate Action is doing, I think this should be worth a thought.
Fantastic. I think that's such an important point, and also how we can think about support programs or other initiatives in an inclusive way that to not just focus on innovation as in creating something new, but also on care, on maintenance, on repair, etc. So I want to open it up. We've received, I'm sorry if I'm looking down to take notes once in a while, but also because we're navigating two chats, I have received a number of questions from the audience, or two at least, in the chat already, and I want to bring those in, and then as well open up the floor for you to come in, your camera and microphones. Maybe circling back to your first intervention, Christine, the question came in from Christine Pinto. How can people participate Oh no, sorry, that wasn't the first question that came in. Scrolling back, definitely the question came in how we can get Germany to join the Energy Compact. What the steps would be? I will recommend that you could recommend toward this. Now, I'm not sure whether to address Ellen with this question or Elizabeth first. Maybe do you want to just recap that point that you made earlier for Ellen and Elizabeth, and then we'll see what Ellen can say how we can get Germany on board.
Well, it's very easy. I mean, from the Gender and Energy Compact side, there's a website you can visit. There are principles that are agreed to by Compact members. And so it's very easy to join either as a member state or as an NGO or other kind of organization.
Maybe this is another concrete takeaway, as in things that could potentially happen moving on from this conversation, Ellen?
Yeah, I mean, let me have a look at that. I mean, the problem is, I think, at the moment also that there are several approaches. I mean, I think what we need to do is also to sort it a little bit. And I think as a ministry, I think we are trying to bring as much information as possible to everybody. So let's see which are the existing initiatives which are existing, because I think what I would really not like to see is competition here on different approaches. So I think it's also what we tried at the G7 and in the G20 context, that we are basing all the work what we are doing on the great initiative Elizabeth and colleagues are doing. So it's a bit difficult for me to answer you now what Germany will join at this stage, but I think what's important is let's do a good mapping. Let's see what's existing, and I think that should be the first part of the work. And I think part of the work we can also then clearly say, is this enough what we have, or do we need to have something more? Is it maybe also good? I really like your comment to say maybe feminist energy policy is also vulnerable towards maybe right wing or towards other policy development, when maybe such a buzzword makes a good approach more vulnerable, then we stay with less let's say provocative work. But I see also many women joining here today is also because of this word, because it is something new in the context, and I think that's also something we can positively use. So again, I mean, I would really like to collect from today as much ideas as you all have, to maybe develop a small concept paper to share with all of you, that we can add it, and then maybe we will meet again in we will probably, everybody's invited to come to Munich on the 15th of June, but I think beyond that we can have a second digital meeting maybe during the summer, so that we have a better concept for the COP28. And at COP28, what I would really like to release is a good joint action plan where we can really mainstream all the efforts which are done by the United Nations, which are done by private initiatives, which are done by several multi-governmental NGO initiatives, industry initiatives, that we can really bring that all together, this strong power. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. And yes, maybe we'll take a minute or two at the end to also outline what will be next possibilities to come together in person and digitally. Elizabeth, did you want to respond to Ellen?
Yeah, I just want to mention a couple of other things about the way forward. One is to make people aware of the data and information and experiences on gender and energy being offered in the international space already. So I mentioned Energia's website. The International Energy Agency also launched this year the IEA Gender and Energy Data Explorer, that has data on women in employment, in senior management, in entrepreneurship, and in innovation for at least DAC countries and some other developing countries as well. SMAP and the World Bank is launching in June, and you can already find it online. a platform with 100 gender and energy related indicators by country, and you can also compare countries. So this is really important resources if you're preparing a project or a program to have some baseline information for the country. IRENA has just published a gender perspective on solar PV that has a survey of women in the workforce, the challenges and practical measures to support women in solar PV. So I think those resources you can already dig into. But what I would really like to say something about moving forward is, you know, we're moving on the Sustainable Development Goals, and there is recognition that gender is on the SDG agenda. The nexus between SDG 5 on gender equality and SDG 7 on sustainable energy is accepted. There's good evidence for this. But we continue to struggle to make progress. And one reason is that we do not have any gender indicators under SDG 7. So SDG 7 is one of only 6 out of the 17 SDGs with no gender-specific indicators. Energia supported the 2022 SDG 7 Technical Advisory Group policy brief on addressing energy's interlinkages with other SDGs. And that started a process to address the need for gender indicators. And indicators are needed in all 4 areas that I mentioned earlier, in energy access, employment and leadership, entrepreneurship, and the enabling environment. So a lot of good work on gender indicators is being done at the implementation level in energy projects, but we have not managed to position gender in a credible, accountable way at the SDG level. And now is the time to rectify this, and the next 2 years are really critical. There will be a global stock taking of progress on SDGs and also the Summit for the Future in 2024 on what the next Sustainable Development Agenda will look like and what are we going to say. We need to be able to propose gender indicators for the next round of SDGs in 2030. And political declarations are guided by targets and indicators. If we do want gender included, we have the next few years for the SDG custodians and the many organizations that are coming at gender from different angles to establish an intergovernmental program, to agree on 2 or 3 indicators for SDG 7, work out methodologies and how data will be collected, advocate for these with member states on the added value of gender indicators, and bring these to the table in the intergovernmental discussions. This is an opportunity that we cannot miss. So feminist energy policies can play an important role in helping to develop and pilot gender indicators to gain acceptance of gender indicators, to be able to measure progress, hold ourselves accountable on gender in the energy sector so that gender is not just lip service or box checking, but we can show real progress that will make a difference in women's lives and that will also improve energy projects and programs and their inclusivity. So that's another area that I feel is very important to work on moving forward.
Absolutely. I'm just going to pause for a minute to see if there's any reactions from your fellow panelists before moving on. I'm not sure, Eva, if you're going to unmute yourself, because otherwise I would go to the next audience question, but do please feel free to...
No. I tried to unmute myself. I think now I'm successful. It's just such a tiny little icon to put on.
Yeah.
I would just like to add, I think we spoke now, or we heard from my fellow panelists a lot about like targets, measures, all the things that we can do to move into the direction of a more just and representative energy policy. I think I would like to add one aspect that should probably not as such be written in a concept, but I think it's something we really need to think about, which is that there is a strong opposition against the things we are speaking about, and that there is a structural nexus between, say, toxic masculinity, between fossil resources, and between authoritarian regimes and policy styles. And they're actually working actively to not let more feminist and more equality and more climate neutrality and so on happen, but to stay in that regime nexus, which is highly privileging them, right? And I think the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy has made excellent analysis of how ever more capital is actually being invested into keeping all these feminists and climate mitigation, so on, developments, or actually how to oppose them, and this whole abortion right movement and so on, how to undermine that. And I think I think we have an international audience here now, but today, unfortunately, but maybe you have followed this in Germany. There's this quite intense policy struggle at the moment about the heating law, so a new law, a law for new for climate neutral heating, put it like this. And I think the way that this policy debate has been going on, and how we lost the secretary in that context and so on, and I think this is quite a good example of how there's this active forces to not have climate neutrality supporting laws, for example. I mean, the cause with the state secretary had also other reasons, which one can debate. But I think it's a good example of how we also need to think of strategies to counter movements, or I don't know what's the counter movement. You can debate, yeah, what's the normal, what's the revolution, so to say. But I think we shouldn't be naive, just thinking that we now put goals and maybe gender budgeting and put more money into this. But if the other side is not playing fair and is using a lot of tactics that we don't want to use, right? We need to at least think about how to deal with that, because we have all the analysis of how classically there's all this hate culture in the internet, how people are just appearing in the Bild Zeitung, and then until they have no more resources to continue the struggle, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And I think if we start with a feminist energy policy debate now, we should equally start with thinking about how to support each other and what to do in that reality, because I think it's just going to get worse, because those who profit from the fossil resources and who profit from the fossil capital they have accumulated and so on, and the whole right-wing politics and so on, they're just going to play even more unfair and more hard in the future, because they realize that they're in a position where they can actually lose their privileges, right? So I think that should be a separate chapter. It should be a different, I don't know, text, a different conversation, but we need to lead that conversation as well.
Yeah, thank you, Eva. I totally agree. We need to think this big. These topics are interconnected, and we need to pay attention to them when we're putting the strategy together in the way that you just outlined. I have a couple more questions that came in through the chat that I would like to pose. One came in from Justicia, who asked, could a feminist energy policy bridge the gap in terms of gender equality when it comes to the energy sector, especially in developing countries? What are the major aspects to look at, and what is a first step a country can take in this regard? So who would like to take a first stab at an answer? Ellen?
I thought that this would be better for Elizabeth to first answer.
Could be for Elizabeth as well. I was hesitating.
Yes.
I mean, based on your
So maybe-
experience also with different international policy dialogues, of course, Elizabeth, if you want to answer too. But of course, Ellen,
Maybe
you have a background.
I go second, Elizabeth. Okay.
Okay. Oh, you're still on mute, Elizabeth.
Can you just, yeah, I was muted, sorry. Can you just repeat the question and what country?
Of course. I'm not sure which country it came from. The person who posted is called Justicia. If you are hearing this and you want to come in with your microphone and camera, please feel free to open both. The question was, could a feminist energy policy bridge the gap in terms of gender equality when it comes to the energy sector, especially in developing countries? And what are the first steps a country can take in this regard?
Okay. Well, when Energia started working in, I mean, our work has all been in developing countries. So we have had support from many donor countries coming in to bring gender ideas. But to us, it's always been very important that we work with partners in the countries. And the way that Energia started was by encouraging networks and partnerships within the countries themselves. So it was a very long process of organizations in the energy sector, working in the energy sector, and gender organizations meeting together and figuring out in the country at their national level, figuring out what did gender and energy in their country mean. So that included NGOs, it included ministries of energy, and it was quite a slow process. But in the countries where those networks really took off, those 22 countries where we have worked over the years, the result was that ministries of energy started, and the energy industry started understanding what was meant by gender and energy. They started seeing that there were real issues that affected the business. There was a business case for them of engaging women, and they started inviting gender organizations to participate, to sit at the table, because they saw that there was some relevance. So it didn't start with a rights approach. It started with more of a you could even say an instrumental approach. Like I can remember when I was working in Ethiopia in the 1970s, and I had the World Bank working on a cooking project there, and they were saying, "Oh, we don't care about women, we don't care about gender, but we care about deforestation and cook stoves. So we know that we have to involve women." So it was sort of a long process to come to the point today where we can talk about rights, and it's not something that happens overnight. The energy sector in most countries, whether developing countries or rich countries, the energy sector is very male dominated. It's very technical. Women are only coming gradually into the sector. So it's something that has to be, there has to be a lot of awareness raising. We try to recruit champions in the energy sector, male and female, who can raise awareness in their settings. Yeah, so let me stop there. But we have methodologies for doing this. We have processes that we have followed, and I'd be happy to share with people who are interested in that.
Thank you
maybe
very
let me
much.
just add here,
Please.
Just to add here, I mean, I think the answer is yes. I think it can help to bridge the gap, but I think the feminist energy policy needs to go beyond the debate of developing countries and industrialized countries. I think that's at least the approach of the feminist foreign policy, which is a little bit, let's say, the role model we are following here. It really should look at the key energy policy. And here I would like to add what Eva just said. I mean, the opposition is taken for granted. And that is why I think we need to find also a concept which is as inclusive and as attractive enough for those men who are a little bit sensitive to the gender perspective too. And I'm also glad to see that also today we do have also male participation today, and I think this should be the way as well. I mean, it should not be exclusive, but it should be actually inclusive. That's what I said from the beginning. I mean, let's take everybody who likes to work together here together and let's not and this way you build alliances also beyond maybe the core feministic approaches. And you mentioned already the International Energy Agency, yes, the IRENA, yes, the United Nations, yes. I would really like us to go to the mainstream industrial networks here, BDEW in Germany, the mainstream energy alliances here. Yes, there will be opposition, but I think if we make it as inclusive as possible, there might be also the chance to win over at least the middle part of the energy sector towards a more progressive feminist energy policy. Thank you.
Thank you. That also fits really well to a comment that came in the chat about targeting men with our strategies and experiences made of not really seeing this care perspective and other topics that you also touched upon earlier, Eva, from Julia. So thank you for posting that comment in the chat, Julia, and I'm glad we managed to touch on those points as well. Looking at the time, I now want to ask if there's anybody who's part of this conversation who would like to open their camera and microphone, ask a question to the panel, or make a comment and join the conversation. Please don't hesitate. It's an open space for you as well. And I'll keep this invitation open till the end of the session. I see a hand go up. Michelle, please. Floor's yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for such a wonderful conversation and the start of the debate. I think I am very, very passionate about this topic, and I think that I tend to agree with a lot of what Eva said. One of my main issues is starting or trying to climb the ladder, the corporate ladder in the energy sector, was that I was basically left out of many things due to care responsibilities. So while we tackle all the issues about having more women sitting at the table, I think there is the issue of the economy of care, or like that we need to become a society of care. That is not only from the perspective of, well, in my case, it's children, but I have also other colleagues with elderly parents who have dropped their different responsibilities to complete this, and unfortunately in this society these duties are not appreciated enough, if at all. But from that perspective, yeah, I think if you have any examples of how to include these thematics, these conversations at the board level, to how to include this as policies, as government policies, because these are cross-cutting issues, without which I don't think that many issues can be resolved. But actually, if we use these cross-cutting issues if we address these issues, there's a spillover effect in other things. And my other question was on we were talking about the role of women in societies as well, and it's normally the women who stay and then normally the women who are the protectors of lands and agricultural farms. What is the best approach from a governmental perspective and the policies to support these women as well? Being that they are not only carers of their family, but they're also carers of the land. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Is that directed at anyone specifically? Would you like to pass it to?
No, please. Anyone
Okay.
in the panel that would like to comment.
Who would like to pick it up? Ellen, sorry, I keep passing things to you first. You're my go-to panelist for questions.
I'm very happy. I mean, this care thing, honestly, just behind this, I have 2 daughters who are screaming, shouting, and fighting.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. I mean, you're doing the care work at the same time as the policy work live right here. I mean,
I think we all know that my husband is certainly on a mission today. I mean, we all know these topics very well, and I think it should be embedded in everything, but I think it's rather a means. I mean, for me, this is like the baseline to be able to work on everything, you know. I mean, I think it is important to address that here as well, but I think yes, I mean, this is a bottleneck which comes to many careers, to many women around the world, is always this stretch between the different duties and how to organize that, and also mentally how to stretch this whole concepts together permanently. But in principle, I really think you need to create space for this topic. Also, I mean, the approach of a feminist energy policy is an extra on. It will not be rewarded probably by many CEOs in the beginning when you commit to this extra work. But I think we have to show that it is beneficial, that you gain something of it, and then you can also create the space for the care, and it's part of your daily job routine. It's accepted. So when we started, honestly, our feministic work in the energy partnerships, there was a lot of opposition, even in the ministry. Oh, is this needed? You know, isn't it already there? And then, you know, it was a group of women who said, no, I mean, it is important to have groups in every energy partnership countries. And it is not something which comes automatically. So you need to create space also in your daily work, and it needs to be recognized, and it needs to be paid. And then you can create it also as part of your care work. So I think we need to give it space in the public debate. And I think we need really, and here I'm with you, Geraldine, I think we need to formulate drastically why it's important, because energy is affecting women often more than men. And on the other side, the energy policy is less female represented than in many other sectors. So we have here 2 really contradictory situations which we can match. And I think that's also why we are supporting GWNet, that feministic energy approach can also go with the energy transition together. So I mean, I think that is really something. Like the feminist foreign policy, it seeks more towards peace and stability. We should really bring that part in as well. So for me, really, I would like to spend the last maybe 10 minutes in the discussion is more on the question on how. What could be really the next steps? And I would really invite everybody here today to give a little bit more input now in how this could look like, and what should be the process, what could be the next steps here.
Yes, thank you, Ellen. I mean, we did collect a lot of great inputs already in the first part of the conversation, and let's see how many more we can get in the last 5 minutes now. The floor is still open. If you want to join the conversation with a camera and microphone, please give me a sign of hand. Maybe just one thing to bring in as a tiny contribution from me. I feel like we need to be having this conversation dedicated to energy and at the same time building allies. Last week, I had the honor of chairing different ministerial roundtables and different events at the International Transport Forum. And I can tell you the exact same conversations are going on about gender inclusion, about green transition, green energy transition in the transport sector. So seeing what are the most energy using sectors that are sort of adjacent to ours, and the same actors having the same conversations, I think would be good to reach out to them and to see how we can include them in this collection of points, Ellen, that you just mentioned, and making sure that our agendas are really connected here. So that's a little input from my side. And if there's no other hands going up, maybe Eva, Elizabeth, from your side, picking up on Ellen's question, last points to share on the how. How are we going to get there? What would be on your recommendation and points list for takeaways? Eva, please, you already opened your mic. Over to you first.
Was that me or it was Eva?
I was going to pass it to Eva, but I'm not sure if she heard me. Elizabeth, would you like to then pick this up first?
Well,
now I can hear you. I don't know.
Oh.
Okay, Elizabeth, go first.
Elizabeth first, and then Eva, your intervention, and then we'll round off with that. Thank you.
Well, I think we've mentioned a number of things that could be done. I see that that in the German context that you would like to move forward. Our always recommendation is that people come together in a multi-stakeholder situation to discuss what are the goals? What are the goals of the gender and energy policy or moving forward? And that then you develop, and that there is a gender analysis of which are the areas that you want to work in. So I think there's been a lot of work in, I mentioned the 4 areas that we see in developing countries. Clearly, there's been a lot of work on the employment idea of increasing women's presence in the energy sector. But there are other areas too. So the first thing to do is to define in a multi-stakeholder way, what are the areas, what does it mean to you, gender and energy? Does it mean only renewable energy? Does it mean changing the energy sector? Does it mean carbon neutral? Is that central to the feminist energy policy in Germany? And then developing what we call a gender action plan. It could be a feminist roadmap or whatever you want to call it, but a plan that includes gender analysis that identifies what are the gender gaps. Because the whole idea is that we identify gender gaps and then we have actions that close those gaps. So there has to be some kind of research, evidence-based analysis that comes first to identify what are the gender gaps that you want to close. Are they in only in employment, or are there other areas? And then you have operational actions that are going to close those gender gaps. And then, very important, what has been lacking is a monitoring plan and being accountable with indicators. I keep coming back to indicators. And then finally,
it's such an important point. And I'm sorry to cut you off, Elizabeth. We are nearly reaching the end of our intervention. I feel like we need another one-on-one between you and Ellen to make sure we have all these points in that upcoming strategy. But if you can ask you to come to close. Sorry, I didn't want to break you off mid-sentence.
Well, just the final thing is that there has to be staff resources and there has to be a budget to implement the gender action plan. And that has to be included. So that's the final thing.
Thank you so much. Really important points made. Eva, additions from your side?
I'll be very quick. One idea is I really like this call for papers that the Foreign Office did when they developed their feminist foreign policy. I think it's also interesting to read those papers that are there now. So I think that could be one step forward. And the second thought is the scenarios of how we envision the energy future. So these climate neutrality scenarios. If you look at them more closely, what kind of futures they design basically, and what that future means with a gender lens, as you said. I think that should also be something that is done, because actually I've worked a lot on German energy scenarios. They're pretty much a lot of aspects that are central to feminist policy are transcribed into the future. So status consumption, for example, motorized individual transport and so on is still very high on the agenda there. And because you said identify like what's different in a gender equal future as opposed to a non-gender equal future, I think that could be something that actually that department which is taking care of the energy scenarios could do. It doesn't really have to be a feminist group, so to say, but you know that analysis should be done. So these are just two thoughts and adding to what you already said. Thank you very much.
Well, I would like to thank the three of you for this really insightful and exciting discussion. Let's give our virtual, and for everybody who feels like joining me in their homes, actual round of applause to Eva Schmid, Elizabeth Cecelski, and Ellen von Zitzewitz. Thank you very much for this exciting discussion, and really timely and important. It was really great to have you. I would like to just use the last seconds of this session to say there will be more opportunities to engage with each other. There will be live events that Ellen mentioned coming up in July in Munich. There will be other virtual events that we'll be hosting during the course of the summer, and more events coming up in the fall. I'm so glad my colleagues just did it in parallel. I was looking for our LinkedIn group, which you're very welcome to join, as well as the other social media channels just posted in the chat. If you check Women Energize on LinkedIn, you can join us there. And of course, we'll keep you updated on upcoming events, but also feel free to use these spaces to share more thoughts with us, more impulses for these strategies, and also for upcoming events and conversations that you'd like to see and be a part of. So with that, again, another big thank you to all the panelists, to all the people who joined the session today. Thank you for using the chat and making this an interactive session. I hope you all have a great day, and that we can together work toward this idea of feminist energy policy. Thank you so much.